All right, here we go. Salesforce B2B Commerce for Visualforce. We are looking at official documentation and resources today. So there is some unofficial documentation and resources. Some people have put up YouTube videos, some people have thrown up websites. Um, Here's a little bit of material on Stack Exchange and things of that nature, but we are going to be focusing on what is the official material put out by Salesforce that is actually endorsed by Salesforce. And we have about 7 things, so we will be looking at that today. A very quick note on certifications. There used to be accreditations. Those have been retired. So there are you cannot get a certification for CloudCraze anymore. So just keep that in mind. People may have gotten the accreditation in the past, and people such as myself, we've had accreditations. There was some maintenance that we would have to do to maintain those accreditations, but that is no longer the case. So there will be no new certified professionals for CloudCraze in the future. So that time has come and gone in lieu of the new B2B Commerce for Lightning experience. Okay, so moving on to the official Salesforce resources for Salesforce B2B Commerce for Visualforce. So we have 7, and so we'll look at these one at a time here. So first of all, we have the functional documentation. And so this is essentially what it does, what it can do, how you can configure it. And so it doesn't go into technical things, but anything that a administrator can do. It is generally found here within the functional documentation, and this is at help.salesforce.com. And so here you can search for content, you can look for a lot of different things functionally, but that's where this lives here. Okay, so moving on to the technical documentation, also called the developer guide. So here, going beyond what an administrator can do, they do supply you with a developer guide. And so this is really good. This is a good place for developers to stop. It goes into, or to start, it goes into detail on certain things and not enough detail or examples on other things. And so this is partly why I'm doing this series of videos, to show you what is there, what is covered, and to try and cover what is not, and try and fill in those gaps. But here you can see we have examples for logic service provider classes, global API classes, extension point classes. So there is a lot of good information in here. And yeah, so what I'm going to try to do is what is not covered, or what is confusing or unclear, I'm going to try and show with an example in this video series. Okay, so that's where the technical documentation lives. That's at developer.salesforce.com. Next, we have the restricted documentation. So I'm actually going to go back to the functional documentation quickly here and show you a note on the restricted documentation. So at the very bottom here, let's see. Yeah, the secured documentation. Request access to secured documentation for Salesforce B2B Commerce for Visualforce. So if you are working on a site for a client and you do not have this secured documentation, reach out to your account representative and try to get your hands on this secure documentation. It makes some things easier. It contains all the handlebars templates. It contains some extra helpful things for you, but you can't generally get this unless you have a license, or you have a client who has a license for Salesforce B2B Commerce. Okay. So that was the restricted documentation. Next we'll talk about partner community resources. I actually don't think there is very much on Salesforce B2B Commerce for Visualforce, but it is, if you are part of a company who is a Salesforce partner, it is worth getting access to partners.salesforce.com and the partner learning camp.salesforce.com because that has a huge amount of info, and it has some information that is not commonly available if you are not a partner. So the process can take a few days to get verified. You usually have to have a company email address and submit that and go through some kind of review process. So sometimes it takes a couple of days for you to get access. But once you do, you can get into the partner learning camp and get access to those materials. So I would also try to do that if possible. So next up is Trailhead. There are not very many good trailheads for Salesforce B2B Commerce for Visualforce. They're either very high level or it is pretty simple accreditation maintenance. So this is an example here. So you can click on that. You can take that trailhead. You can see all the updates that happened in the Summer 20 release for Salesforce B2B Commerce. And so sometimes you can find some helpful things on Trailhead. So it's worth going to Trailhead, doing a search for B2B Commerce, and see what you can find on Salesforce B2B Commerce for Visualforce. Okay. But before we go into Salesforce training seminars, I just want to throw in a fun piece of trivia. So I actually recommended to Salesforce because they used to have the B2B Lightning and B2B Visualforce documentation combined into the same page. So actually, let me go back and show this. So Salesforce B2B Commerce for Visualforce. So yeah, it used to be combined, and so each article would say, this is not available for Lightning, or this is not available for Visualforce. And so it used to be very confusing because if you searched for, so like how to adding products or managing products, or let's see, tiered pricing or something like that. So you might get it back in the day, like and when I say back in the day, maybe a year ago, 6 months to a year ago, there would be two results, one for Lightning and one for Classic. But I recommended to them to split it up, and they did. So I'm really glad. So it makes it much easier because if you know you're only working on the Visualforce version, you don't want to get all these results from Lightning. So I'm glad they did that. Okay, that was just a side note. So next official resource, the official Salesforce training seminars. So if you are a partner or if you have a client and you have a Salesforce account rep, or that client does, and you're interested in this, this is really good to get a storefront up and running and understand the basics of how to configure, the process of creating configurations and building the configuration cache, and the basics of setting up products and users and really getting started. This is very good for that, but what I've mentioned in a previous video is this really only scratches the surface if you do the technical training. And it's a good place to start. I will say it's expensive. When I went to this training, it was a week long. I believe the first so I believe it was 5 days, and I believe the first 3 days were the administrator training, and the last 2 days were the technical developer training. And so it wasn't bad, but just know that you'll probably still be left with a number of questions and gaps, but that if going from zero to working storefront, that it's actually a pretty good course from my experience with this. And this is from me taking this training seminar, perhaps a couple of years ago. So my recommendation is to reach out to your Salesforce account rep to see if this is still offered for CloudCraze and to get options and pricing. And just a heads up, it is a little expensive, but if you do have a big budget or a reasonable budget, may be worth the investment to get started off on the right foot. Okay. So the last thing I will mention as part of the official documentation is you can find some recorded Dreamforce videos or other Salesforce conference videos where people actually show or teach something about B2B commerce. And this is an example. This is actually when I was at Dreamforce presenting on B2B commerce. So you'll hear my voice in there if you go to this one. But that is really the last official channel I have in terms of official documentation and resources for Salesforce B2B Commerce for Visualforce. So, like I said, what we're doing in this series, so we've identified what's out there, what's official from Salesforce. I'm going to be trying to fill in the gaps of what we do not have. But as a part of your due diligence, if you are starting out in Salesforce B2B Commerce for Visualforce, you should see what you can find, go through all of this, bookmark the functional documentation, read through it, bookmark the technical documentation, and read through it as well. And pay special attention. What I like to recommend for people who are new to Salesforce B2B Commerce is to look at all of the configuration options, and I'm sure we'll touch on that in a follow-up video. But we will we will do that in a following video. So this video is just really about what's out there and what's officially from Salesforce. So I hope that's helpful. I hope that gets you started on your reading and learning journey. And I will see you in the next one. Thank you.